Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Gonzales, I can speak, I think, both for Mr. Ellison and myself. Thank you for your staying to the end for the end of the benchers over here. We almost always are given an opportunity to ask questions, and we appreciate the full opportunity to do that. Given that I am from a state that decided the closest presidential election in American history, you might imagine that I would have some concern and interest over voter fraud and voter suppression. This is Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and I want to read for you the definition in this dictionary of fraud. Intentional perversion of truth in order to induce another to part with something of value or to surrender a legal right. Now, Mr. Lundgren from California earlier today talked about the priorities of the administration and the direction that was perhaps given to U.S. attorneys to pursue voter fraud as a priority of the administration. And I'm going to assume, for the record, that that was a priority of the administration, and it was communicated to U.S. attorneys, as you've indicated in your testimony today.
Well, the way I would characterize it was important. I mean,
okay.
It was important to the administration.
The priorities are important.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that in my line of questioning. So that having been said, generally I would expect that the pursuit of voter fraud would be along the lines of organized efforts to corrupt the election process. And given the dictionary definition that I just read for you, I want you to tell me whether you think that pursuing a jewelry store owner who got into trouble after a clerk at the motor vehicles office had given him a registration form to complete that he quickly filled out in line and was unaware that it was reserved just for United States citizens, a 68-year-old man named Mr. Alley, whether you think, and that's from the New York Times article of April 19th, whether you think that that meets the definition of fraud as Merriam-Webster defines it, and also in terms of widespread voter corruption. Before you answer, I want to give you two other examples. In Alaska, Rogelio Murata Lopez managed a gasoline station. He received a voter registration form in the mail. Because he had applied for citizenship, he thought it was permissible to vote. He now might be deported to Mexico after 16 years in the United States. Does that meet the dictionary definition or a definition of widespread voter fraud? There's also an example of someone who was actually deported because they made an innocent mistake in filling out a voter registration application. Is that an example of the priorities or the importance that was given in terms of the instructions that you relayed to the United States attorneys in terms of pursuing voter fraud?
At one point, you described it as an innocent mistake. If, in fact, we're talking about innocent mistakes, mistakes happen. If you're talking about intentionally stealing votes, intentionally canceling out
No,
votes,
I'm not. I'm talking about the examples that I just gave you.
Yes, I mean, those examples would not be ones that I would view as, and I don't think U.S. attorneys, quite frankly, would look at those cases as priorities.
Those are all cases that were prosecuted by U.S. attorneys.
There are more,
all of them.
There are more egregious examples, and again, you're
not that the department pursued.
You're taking, well, I don't know all the facts here, and so out of fairness to the decisions, if in fact there were decisions made by U.S. attorneys to prosecute these kinds of cases, I don't know whether or not there are additional facts that may have made a difference in moving forward with these kinds of prosecutions.
General Gonzales, I have had a really hard time today figuring out what it is you do know. I've sat through this entire hearing, and most of your answers have been, you don't know. Now, you know what? I'm 40 years old, and I'm reaching a point where I have spottiness in my memory too. But something as significant as the lapses in memory that you seem to have had related to the firing of the U.S. attorneys, and something as significant as not knowing whether or not there has been widespread pursuit by your U.S. attorneys to investigate and pursue corruption and voter fraud as opposed to individual cases. These are individual cases cited in a New York Times article, the headline of which is "In 5-Year Effort, Scant Evidence of Voter Fraud."
Are you basing your questions based on a newspaper article?
I'm basing my questions based on U.S. attorneys quoted in this newspaper article. In Miami, an assistant United States attorney said many cases there involved what were apparently mistakes by immigrants, not fraud. The headline says, "In 5-Year Effort, Scant Evidence of Voter Fraud." So if this was a priority, how was it communicated to the U.S. attorneys, and why were they not pursuing it in terms of widespread corruption as opposed to pursuing individual cases that apparently were mistakes?
Well, again,
as opposed to
10
voter
seconds
suppression?
remaining.
Well, of course,
Thank
I mean, again, these are decisions made by the United States attorneys in terms of what is appropriate. And I guess it may be easy to sit here and criticize the prosecutorial decisions made by the United States attorneys, but
that's why they were fired.
we have an obligation.
That's why a number of them
we have
were
an
fired. You did
obligation
criticize
to
them.
enforce the law, including voter fraud.
Time of the gentlelady has expired.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask unanimous consent for 30 more seconds? I mean, we sat here the whole day, Mr. Chairman, and a number of other members had that opportunity.
I'm totally persuaded.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. General Gonzales, I just want to point out what you said on April 19th in response to a question by Senator Cardin, which was your opinion as you expressed it about voter fraud and it being a priority. You made a reference to your growing up in a poor neighborhood and that the one day you were equal to everyone else was on Election Day, and so you really appreciated how important the right to vote is. Voter fraud, to me, quoting you, means you're stealing somebody's vote, and so I take this very, very seriously. Having said that, in enforcing or prosecuting voter fraud, we need to be careful that we don't discourage people or intimidate people from participating on Election Day. You clearly have not struck the right balance, and your statements in committee and your answers to questions here and the evidence that is clear from the U.S. attorneys under your control pursuing innocent mistakes as opposed to widespread corruption are evident. I yield back the balance of my time.